applications group where we do all sorts of pattern recognition work and algorithm development. And I'll be speaking about the automatic identification of classified documents. And I'll start by talking about why we want to find classified documents, how people find classified documents, and what's been done so far to automate that process, or at least assist that process automatically. And then I'll describe the two projects that I've been involved with in the area, one of them sponsored by the DOE for a general project they have, and then more recently work that we're doing at Los Alamos for our own systems. So let me begin with the motivation. Why do we want to separate classified from unclassified documents? Well, maybe it's pretty obvious. Where can I put my water? Here we go. Throughout the 1990s, the main reason why there was an effort to automate the process of separation of classified and unclassified documents was because of an open government philosophy, a kind of a these documents belong to the people approach, which dictated that documents that are classified should remain classified for as short a time as possible and should be declassified whenever possible. And this philosophy was encoded in an executive order that was signed by President Clinton in 1995 that mandated that classified documents held by the federal government should be reviewed and declassified if possible. This executive order set out time frames. So if you, from now on, when this started, when you created a classified document, you had to say how long should it remain classified, and if you didn't say, then the default was going to be 10 years. And it furthermore stated a deadline of April 17th of this year. And I'm not sure what's happened to this deadline, whether it's actually held, but supposedly anything older than 25 years old was supposed to be automatically declassified at that point if it hadn't been reviewed. Now, as I said, I'm not too sure how seriously this was taken in terms of the deadline, but it was taken very seriously in terms of let's get a declassification review process going by all of the federal branches that held large collections of classified material, which included the Department of Energy and also the CIA, the FBI. All of these agencies had boxes of warehoused documents, classified documents, that now had to be looked at and verified as still being classified, otherwise they were supposed to be let go. Hundreds of millions of pages. So this was a big deal, and all of a sudden the money began to flow. Very exciting. So that's a push for open government. Paradoxically, the same interest in automatic identification of classified documents came from the opposite pull, a push for verifying the security of government holdings. So if you have a mixed usage computing facility like Los Alamos National Laboratory, where we have classified and unclassified computing files, how do we make sure that the open area doesn't contain classified documents? Well, we hadn't addressed this very strongly until last year when the Wen-Ho Lee incident occurred, and the Department of Energy came to Los Alamos and they said, well, if Mr. Lee had classified documents on an unclassified system at Los Alamos, how do you know that someone else hasn't done the same thing? So at that point, we began a systematic review of our unclassified holdings looking for classified information. And this was really done under the congressional gun. After Mr. Lee was fired, the classified computing at the laboratory was shut down for more than a month, and we were not allowed to restart not just Los Alamos, but also Lawrence Livermore in California and Sandia in Albuquerque, the three research labs. We were not allowed to restart our classified computing until we had set forth an action plan for dealing with computer security. And included in that was automated sniffing and monitoring programs that continuously scan for classified content in unclassified storage archives and outgoing email. So that's how I got to do what I'm doing now. So these were this incident, and also this was sparked by an extraordinary event. something that made the newspapers. Likewise, the open government thing started with a scandal. I don't know if people remember, in the early 1990s, it came out that the Department of Energy had been doing radiation testing on human subjects without informed consent, and that started this whole open government thing. What are these horrible secrets that we've been keeping from the American people? So those are both extraordinary events that started the open government thing and the more recent security push. But there's also a kind of a background level of interest in classification that justifies the interest in automated processing of documents, automated review for classified content. And I had this discussion with a gentleman at the DOE who's very involved in automatic declassification. So that's the open government thing. I said, well, what happens if that goes away? And he said, well, we still have to deal with Freedom of Information Act requests. So any American citizen can petition for documents to be declassified, and then somebody has to review them to let them out. And it's a high volume. So an automation might facilitate that process. There's also apparently a lot of lawsuits against the government that involve the release of classified information. So if I have a lawsuit and I need, in the discovery procedure, I might say, well, I need that document, then someone has to review it and hopefully declassify it. So that's another, apparently there's a lot. And then another issue is that the people who are the experts in classification are, a lot of them, aging nuclear scientists. And when they go, their knowledge is going to go with them. So the more we can encode their expertise in software, the better off we are. So those are some of the motivations. Now, looking on to human methods for classification and declassification of documents. How does a classification expert look at a document and know what to call it? Well, at least in the Department of Energy, you have to familiarize yourself with a whole set of classification guides, which are quite arcane and very heavily classified themselves. It takes a long time, and you have to know, when you look at a document, sometimes it's not just one thing that makes it classified, it's a whole combination. So that's quite tricky. And sometimes, even one of these classification people can't tell for sure. They might have to go to the person who wrote this document and have a discussion with them for the final determination. So it can get quite involved. And then when it comes to source code, because a piece of software can be classified depending on what you can use it for. And my goodness, it's hard to understand someone else's software, or maybe it shouldn't be, but it is. Or what if you have a binary, classified binary? How are you supposed to make heads or tails of that? So it's quite a tricky issue. Now, I thought maybe I'd bring a classified document with me, but I didn't want to go to jail. So instead, I classified myself. So let's say that making a cake is unclassified, but chocolate cakes are classified. And I have to put in a caveat, which is that I haven't actually tried this recipe, but we'll do it anyway. So let's say this is hypothetically how a classification expert might mark up a document like this. So there might be cases where one word itself is classified. So let's say when you actually get to chocolate, the word chocolate. Well, in your classification guide for ingredients, section 113, paragraph 65, it would say if you use the word chocolate, that's secure restricted data. So it would be marked off like that. And then there might be another section where it's more a combination of elements. So here, if you say you're beating it with a mixer and you're using a spatula and it's thick like sour cream, well, you put those all together. And in my classification guide for tools, it says you really, that together makes a picture that I don't like, and that's going to be classified at the secure, confidential national security information level. So I'm going to mark that. So this is the kind of thing that a classification person does. And if you did a Freedom of Information request on this recipe, you would get it back with all the chocolate parts crossed out. So you'd only get the cake and not the chocolate. So that's what a human does. Now, let's say you want to automate this process. Well, what the Department of Energy has done is they've written some expert systems that try to incorporate these guides as a rule structure. They have one system called ultrastructure, and that seems to be the more successful. They're incorporating that into a new system called the Reviewer's Assistant. And I've put this down here. It's assistant because all these systems do is they sort of pre-select and pre-sort the data so that the actual human classifiers can make a final determination. Because nobody's going to trust a machine to say, this document is unclassified, let's let it go, because what if it goofs? So in general, this software is being used to pre-sort and to prioritize and to give information. Like this reviewer's assistant would say, I think this phrase is classified, and I think it refers to this classification guide section, because then when the reviewer looks at it, they can do it much faster. They have another system called TAP that was developed at Livermore. They're using that at Sandia for the email scanning. And in all of this work that comes from the Department of Energy, there's a focus on hard copy documents, because you have to picture these boxes and warehouses. So what they do is they unpack the box, they take it over to the automatic scanning machine, and it scans it all in, turns it into images, the images are turned into text, and then they process the text to try to sort it by topic and likely classification stuff, and then it goes to the human. So the humans see the stuff on the screen along with the output from the pre-sorting system, and then they can make their determinations. And we've actually contributed in a separate capacity to that effort. When they scan in these documents, they're really ugly. I mean, these may have come from mimeograph machines, multiple Xeroxes, very, very bad. So we've developed a system that assesses the image quality with factors that are specific to documents like speckle and fattened characters, and then we automatically choose the best restoration algorithm. So a couple of these agencies in the declassification area are using our software to improve that part of the process. So that's all the context. So I'll be talking about two ways that I've been involved in this work. One for the DOE and one for Los Alamos itself. So for the Department of Energy, I helped out with their declassification process. So let's get rid of the documents. As I mentioned, they have an expert system in place already. So they gave us some money to explore statistical methods as a complement to the expert system. And they didn't give us a lot of data. This was a major restriction in this project because they wanted to give us the real data, actual documents from the declassification project that had been scanned in and OCR'd and had also been marked up by a classification person, like that chocolate cake recipe. And it's very expensive to produce that data, so we only got a little bit, and I'll be embarrassed to tell you how much. But I did everything I could with that data, and I'll be showing you the results. Now, the other thing I've done is I've worked at Los Alamos, working on the other end, on the security side. So we want to look at our unclassified files and make sure that they really are unclassified. This was a fresh effort. It's not like we already had, like DOE had already invested in their expert system. So what we started off with is an expert system, and we have one that's tailored to the Los Alamos environment. And we have lots and lots of data, but unfortunately we don't know anything about it because it's just sitting out there in our storage archives. It came from individuals. So one thing that we need to do is to characterize the archives in addition to looking at the individual files. These documents, in contrast to the DOE data set, are native electronic. They were written, they're not scanned in. The downside is that they're in all sorts of different formats, including some that are obsolete. So we've had some interesting data format issues. And my talk there will focus on the practical issues, since I can't really talk about our results. So we've got complementary projects. So for the DOE project, like I said, they didn't give us a heck of a lot of data. We had 25 classified documents and 14 unclassified. And working with these documents that was really cool. I had to have a separate line installed in my office so I could look at them safely. It was really fun. So these were actual legacy documents, and they had been through this process of OCR. They had been cleaned up somewhat after the OCR process because they didn't want to throw up the OCR as a huge obstacle, but they weren't perfect. They were far from perfect. And then this guy at Sandia had done that bracket and tag business. So there were a lot of typos in the bracketing and the tagging, so my first step was to clean that up. And when we started this project, it would have been nice if we had already developed a categorization system for text. Then I could have immediately applied that. But we didn't have one. So my first step was to develop a text categorization system so that I could apply it to the DOE data. And to develop that system, I used a developmental corpus of physical review articles. PhysRev has A, B, C, D, and E, and it's roughly topical. So I trained a system to tell them all apart. And I did this using a statistical approach. That was our mandate from the DOA. And the approach that I used was based on automatic topic categorization research, which is a thriving branch of pattern recognition, and it's used for things like email filtering and the processing of newswire services, so you can figure out the content. And when you're doing this statistically, your basic idea is you want to take each document and represent it quantitatively as some sort of a vector, and then you train a classifier to separate the documents on the basis of these vectors. So mostly I was trying to tell apart classified and unclassified documents, but I'll show you experiments that I did also at the levels of text and of topic. Because classified, unclassified is just this binary thing, but you can break down classified into classified topics and unclassified into unclassified topics too. So I'll talk more about representing each document as a statistical vector, because how you do that influences everything that comes down the stream. And most people, when they do this, they count word frequencies, which involves a certain amount of pre-processing. You want to get rid of your common words like the, because those are useless. You also want to strip off the word endings. We decided instead to use a character trigram representation. Now, it could be trigrams. It could also be 4 grams or 5 grams. We stuck with 3 because we wanted to get something working and didn't have a lot of time. And the idea here is you run a character window over a word. So, for example, nuclear breaks down to word space NU, then NUC, UCL, etc., down to AR and end of the word. And you count the frequencies of those short character sequences instead of the frequencies of words. Now, why would you want to do this? Our big motivation was because of OCR error. If you have a word that's been scanned incorrectly and you represent it as a word, it's not going to be recognizable. I guess you can add a spelling correction module, but using this trigram representation is a kind of a virtual error correction, and it's been shown to work very well on noisy data in other applications like information retrieval. The idea is, for example, if you've telephone and then somewhere else you've got an OCR error that changes the H into a B, which is plausible, they're still going to have a lot of trigrams in common. So they're recognizable as each other despite that one error. Of course, the longer the word, the better. But these are long-winded DOE documents, so that's good. We had used n-gram analysis successfully in the past for medical records analysis. So we felt pretty confident about it. So how do you take a document and turn it into a character n-gram vector? Well, the first thing that you do is you take all of your documents, and each of them you're going to represent by their raw trigram counts. But then, just like when you're looking at words, you want to remove the common words. Also, likewise with the trigrams, you want to focus on your best ones, the ones that are going to give you your best bang for the buck. And that's a kind of a feature selection question, to use the phrase from pattern recognition or data mining, knowledge representation, whatever. So we're going to, the metric that we used to focus on the best trigrams was a chi-square metric. So the basic idea is you've got a topic, and let's see. So you have a topic like classified versus unclassified, and then you have a feature like the trigram ABC. So then you want to count how many documents are there in this topic that have the feature, that have the trigram, or that don't. And likewise, you take the trigrams that are outside of your topic, and how many have the feature versus how many don't. And when you see a skewed representation like that, then you know that the occurrence of this feature is heavily influenced by the topic. And the chi-square metric is just the statistic that you use to represent the skewness of that distribution. So something like THE is going to be perfectly even because it shows up all over the place. So we use this metric to rank the trigrams, and then depending on what parameter setting we were using, we'd keep the top 25, 50, 100. Actually, I think we may have gone from 100 to 500. And there's a lot of work about the use of different metrics in topic categorization work. It's very well studied. So we focus on the trigrams we like, and we unit normalize the vector. So that's what we have. And here's an overview of our training and testing procedure. In general, we did 5-fold cross-validation. It's actually 10-fold for the physical review stuff because we had more documents. So this means that 5 times we divided the data into a training set and a test set. That was 4/5 and 1/5. And we focus on the training set, and we do this chi-square thing to figure out the best trigrams, and we make the vectors, and we train the classifier. Then we go over to the test set and do the classification. And then we start all over again. So each time we're getting results on 1/5 of the data, we put that together, we have our final answer. The classifier that we used was a linear classifier, so there was a separate independent weight for each of the features. And we trained this classifier with something called the pocket algorithm, which is the same algorithm actually that we used in the document quality assessment and restoration work. It seemed to work very nicely for both problems. We tried some other classifiers, but the linear classifier seemed to do just as well. So we stuck with that. So, as I said before, we were starting off from scratch here. We didn't have an off-the-shelf topic categorization system. So we wanted, and we also didn't have a lot of money, so we wanted to get quickly to something that worked respectably well on normal topics so that we could go on to what we really cared about, which was classification. So we started with the physical review set, and we got a decent result, 83%. And this was, it's hard to compare to what's in the literature because we were using our own set of data. The standard corpus people use is some newswire stories from Reuters. But we felt this was good enough to proceed. And what we liked especially was that this nice tendency that the more specific the topic of the physical review set, the better the results on it. So nuclear physics is very cohesive. This is particle physics. The worst one was the one that included related interdisciplinary topics. So it seemed that our algorithm was behaving sensibly and that we would go ahead and use that as the basis for our work with the classified documents. So the first thing we did was we took our classified documents and our unclassified documents. For the classified set, we make sure to go in and remove all the classification markings because we didn't want to train on them. That would be no fair. And we did 79% averaged between how we did unclassified and unclassified. Now when we looked at the results, not surprisingly, the hardest documents to classify were the ones that were in some sense between classified and unclassified. So there were some unclassified documents that were all about nuclear weapons. Actually, to my uninformed eyes, I didn't know why they weren't classified. It's like, how to make a bomb. But I guess they didn't tell you well enough. There were also, so those were often categorized as classified. Then there were classified documents that were like, you know, this long thing with unclassified text, and then right in the middle there would be like one sentence that's classified. So that's, you know, sort of not fair. How do you expect your learning algorithm to make the judgment just on the basis of that little bit of text? So I tried an experiment to give the algorithm a better chance to succeed, which was that I split the classified documents into classified versus unclassified text. So to go back to our chocolate cake, I would pull out the word chocolate, which itself was sensitive, and then this whole discussion of different methods, and that would become a little bitty classified document, and this would remain as an unclassified document. And once I did this, results improved somewhat, actually substantially. Again, it's hard to say when we only had 40 documents. But it got better. was now up to 87% on average, which is actually better than we did on the physical review corpus. So it seemed that we could actually, if, you know, especially if we had more data, I hope, we could actually do a fair job of sorting this stuff based on the, based purely on the, basically on the vocabulary in the documents. Now, when the DOE goes through this declassification process, you know, they have this reviewer's assistant program, so the more information you can provide to the reviewers, the better. So they wanted us to look at whether we could actually figure out what topic a document was about. Not just was it classified or unclassified, but which classified topic, which unclassified topic. So this was a lot of work. I sat down with a domain expert, one of our classification people, and went through our corpus. And here, the small size of the corpus was really an item in our favor because we were able to study the documents. And for each document, we assigned it a primary topic and if appropriate, some secondary ones. So, so we had, for the unclassified documents, it was either documents that were about nuclear weapons and everything else. Those were our two unclassified topics. Then looking at the classified topics, we had like 6, and I won't tell you what they are, but it was cool. So, so now we have every document labeled for topic with possibly multiple labels, and we did two tests which were dismal. First, we did a forced choice thing where each document was assigned to one category. Then we did an M out of N where it could be assigned to as many as the algorithm wanted to, or maybe even to none. And it really just didn't do well. So there's 2 reasons, possible reasons why it failed. One is maybe, you know, no can do. Maybe you just can't get at these topics. But I think it was really, that's where the data scarcity was really starting to hurt us. When I look at the different experiments that we did, basically the more training exemplars we had, the better the results, which is actually very encouraging for the future. So the best results we had were on the split documents, classified versus unclassified text, and there, because each of the classified documents became a classified document plus an unclassified document, we had more training examples. That was our best result, and then we had classified versus unclassified. When we did, the worst one was on topic where it was 1 out of N, because each document, you know, we had all these like 8 different topics and everything was put in, each document could only go in one pile. So we had very, very short piles, very few documents per topic. So we were asking it to learn something almost ridiculous. So I'm hoping that the scarcity was the main problem. So to sum up what we learned, oh no, I won't sum up what we learned. I'll say what we want to do next with it. We have this algorithm, and we don't really know how good it is compared to the standard stuff out there. So one thing we'd like to do is to use the gold standard, this Reuters Newswire corpus, and see how good our algorithm actually is. We definitely need more data. The fact that we did better on text, on pure text rather than like documents which are a mixture of classified versus unclassified, implies that we should be, if this is used in practice, then maybe you'd want to work on a running window, because inside a window maybe the text is more consistent. So I'd like to try training on little bits of text which are coherent and then testing on that. And that's something which I hope would do better. We have this premise that that it's good to use character n-grams because of the OCR error. Well, you know, we could try to prove that. Use documents that contain OCR error versus those that have been cleaned up, or maybe simulate OCR error. That would be a good thing. And we have colleagues who have expertise in natural language processing, which would increase the power greatly, because you wouldn't be just looking at the vocabulary, but at the meaning. So that's a whole other direction. So that was the DOE project. Now for the laboratory,
We have those colleagues where?
oh, well, we've got Victor Raskin in the front row. And New Mexico State University is only 5 hours away by car. That's a short distance in the Southwest. Okay, the other project I've been working on is checking our unclassified file archives, looking for classified documents. So we have an acronym. We'd really like it to be FAUST, but haven't been able to find a U word for it. So we have all these file archives and like millions of files. And this is our first effort, we're doing an expert system. And we're looking at the file names, also the file contents. And we have all these experts at Los Alamos, classification people who know all about our classified files. So they've told us what they want us to look for. And that's nice. And we have this parallel effort that's ongoing in the email scanning. I haven't been involved in that. So here's what we're doing. You have to keep in mind that we've got the open system and we've got the secure system. And they're separate. There's an air gap between them. We don't have any electronic connections between open and secure. So the files we care about are sitting on the open computers. So we want to make sure they're unclassified. But we can't actually look at them on the open system. Partly because some of the content that we're looking for is classified, and we don't want to stick our rules out on the open system, and partly because of what a mess it is if you're actually looking for a classified file among these open documents and you actually find one. Now you've contaminated your machine. You've probably contaminated the printer down the hall, and your system administrator is never going to forgive you. So it's a very messy situation, and this requires us to bring everything over to the secure in order to perform our analysis. That's been a major pain because we're not really set up for big transfers like that. And that's one thing that's a practical issue that we've had to deal with. What we're planning now is to take actually a whole volume, a whole tape, and transfer that physically rather than one file at a time. But I don't think I want to go too much into that. So now we're over on the secure. We've got copies of these files that we've sampled from among our unclassified holdings, and we're going to look through them and run our algorithm and find any files that look suspicious according to the computer. Now, but this is too many files. It overgenerates like crazy, which is typical in this kind of massive screening computer security stuff. So we have an authorized derivative classifier who's actually a guy who's on the computer storage team who's been drafted into this capacity. But he does have the derivative classifier training and knows all these manuals. Hopefully backwards and forwards. So he looks at the list that I spit out and eliminates the obvious false positives. And anything that's left, which is not much at this point, he alerts this file storage people, and back on the open side, they're going to not delete the files, but they're going to block access to them. So you don't want to do that on the basis of the big list because it's got too many false positives, but once you're down to this, we block the access. And then the next thing that happens is that we have to notify the person. We don't want to notify the person who owns the file in case there's anything going on, but we contact their management. And you can't do that just in the open, because you can't send email, dear Mr. Group Leader, John Doe in your group has this file on the open storage systems. It's file XYZ, and we think it might be classified because it contains the following suspicious content. You can't do that by email. You can't do it by phone call. What we're going to have in the future is a system where we assign identifiers to suspicious files, and then we have a database that everyone who works on the project can access, so that we can just say, please log on to the secure system and investigate file 1234. Suspect ID 1234. But for now, we just started a few months ago, so there's a lot of for now and in the future. So for now, our guy who's doing the preliminary reviews actually goes over physically to someone's manager's office, and he says there's this problem, and every group in the lab is supposed to have an authorized derivative classifier assigned to them, so that classifier then needs to come back over to our guy's office so that he can get onto our system and have a look at the file. So we've got, at this point, we've got a lot of sort of tape and scissors kind of stuff, but hopefully all of this will be streamlined shortly. We're coding up the database right now. So So the owners group does this final review, and if there's a problem, then we have all sorts of notifications that have to be done of the security people, possible disciplinary action, and any systems that are involved have to be cleaned, and everything gets reported to security. It's possible if we find a classified file on the storage system, they might also have a local copy on their own machine. So everything needs to be checked. So this procedure, when this started, you know, we had this DOE order, you have to check your file systems. It started out sort of on a small scale. You know, somebody starts sampling files, I start looking at them, and then we realized that this ties in, it's like all over the lab, because these files can belong to anybody. So it's gone into, there are all these management issues that have arisen, and I'm including this in the talk because this is, you talk to anybody who does computer security, and they will tell you that it's not just a technical issue. It's very much a management issue, and you have to have the management buy-in, and you have to have the management coordination. Because when our guy goes over to a group leader and says, there might be a file problem, you have to look at file XYZ, he has to have the authority to spawn a review. Otherwise, the group leader will say, well, I have no time for this. I don't know who my derivative classifier is. Well, just go away. I don't want to know about it. So we really have to have a coordinated procedure around the laboratory. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. So the storage system managers are involved. We have to get the file owners and the group management involved when we have an incident. The security division, they're the last, the last authority of review of documents, especially if the owner has left the lab. Or we actually have some outside users who've been able to use the Los Alamos systems. So what if we find a bad file or a file that might be bad that belongs to them? The security people take ownership of those. And if we find something, then at this point, because of what happened at the lab last year, it's not just the local management that wants to know about it. DOE headquarters wants to know if we find something bad on our system. And if we find a lot of stuff, you know, Congress is going to want to know. So it's really this high-level stuff. I'm just sort of here on my computer. And because it's a serious thing, we have to keep very good records. What are the files we've looked at? What are the ones that the computer flagged as suspect? We have to track the investigation process. And if there's mistakes in the process, we have to note them and correct them. And none of this is easy now, but hopefully it will be when we have our database going. So as I mentioned, we've got a bunch of data issues because we've got all these files out there, and what the heck are these files? So some of them are really, really old. This system, we're looking at the file storage system we're looking at now. It was put in place in the 70s, but some of the files that went into it were already pretty old by that time. So we have some real legacy stuff. And there's really weird file formats, which for the time being I'm mostly setting aside because there's so much work in the other aspects that I'm focusing on the ones that I already can read, and then I want to come back to the file type issues. So I've already found stuff like Los Alamos has this S text. S is for standardized, and that's like an interformat, an interchange format that's totally peculiar to Los Alamos, so that when we migrated between different operating systems, you'd move things into S text and then you'd translate it into the native text on your new machine. So that's been educational for me. And then you see files that are readable as ASCII, but it just reads as one long line because it's got a weird end of line character. So I have to identify those, and I do character counts and stuff, and then break them apart so I can process them fluently in a sort of line-by-line manner. Something you see immediately, if any of you have ever used a big file archive, you don't want to transfer 10,000 files separately. If you want to back up something that's got 10,000 files, you make your tar and you compress it, and then you stick it out there. So then there's me, and I download this tar file. So I've had a lot of fun writing all these loops for doing like a tar minus L, and then I loop through and uncompress everything one at a time. It's really cool. But this means that you download one file, and you're really downloading 10,000. So it can multiply tremendously. And you really want to look at all of them because in the individual files is where the data is. That's where the content is. And then, how do you analyze a CAD file? PostScript graphics, these are some of the interesting questions. Binaries for the time being I'm putting aside, but those are all sorts of interesting questions. Maybe we could categorize famous Los Alamos binaries and look for them on the OPID. I think that would be a great idea, and if we get more funding, that would be a top priority. But it's a big problem. Just on this first storage system, we've got 4 million files. And one thing that means is that, at least for the present, we can't look at all of them. Now, if we find, so we're sampling. My next slide's about that. But let's say we find out that on the basis of our sample that, well, let's take an absolute worst case scenario. Let's say 10% of our documents are actually classified, which is impossible. At that point, we're going to have to probably shut down the system. That's another story. But we're going to have to review all the documents. God forbid, if that should happen, we'll worry about it. But for now, we're just sampling, and we want to be able to tell the DOE what is our estimate of the nature of the problem. Do we have a lot of classified files? Do we have very few? And the sampling, the statistical sampling, has been a big issue because, if you've ever taken any sampling theory, the first thing you do is you establish your population. Then you want to do a random sample from the population. But the problem is we have no flat listing of the files on this system. And they can't generate one except because this is really old and idiosyncratic, our system. To make a flat listing takes a half a day, and they have to free up all these tapes, which they don't really have. So the storage people absolutely blanch at it. I thought it would be easy, get a flat list and make your random picks. It's actually very difficult. The system is organized by routes. So like my primary route is 106995, that's my Z number. And then other projects that I have, I've made other routes, okay? And then other people have their routes. So when we started, our head storage guy went over to talk to the statisticians, and he says, how do we do a random sample? We've got all these routes, and the files are under the routes. So the statistician said, we'll do a 2-stage sample. Randomly choose a route, and then inside the route, randomly choose a file. So that would have been fine, and we started doing that until we sort of snapped to that some of the routes only have 2 files, and then others might have 10,000 or 20,000. So that's very bad from a statistical perspective, because if you're a file that lives in a big root, your chances of being picked are minimal. But this guy's going to get picked all the time. And in fact, we were seeing a lot of duplicates. So our statistical sampling procedure was lousy. So then as a second stage, we tried, well, let's pick our roots not randomly. Let's pick our roots proportionally to their size. So that worked out great from the statistical perspective. But as soon as we got to a big root, which we were hitting all the time, the big roots, to list them out and pick a random file inside was taking hours because of this same lack of flat listing problem that we have inherent in the system. So our sampling dropped down from thousands of files being sampled every day to a handful. So that brought the process to its knees. And that's typical of the kind of real-life practical thing that we've had to deal with and that you deal with in security, because you're wrestling with real systems. So this is why we're going to go to this new system where we grab a whole tape off of the common file system, because they have had so many migrations from generations of tape to the next generation, which holds more stuff. And they also migrate files that don't get used off to slow media, and then they bring them back on, and they have a tape and it only has a little stuff left on it, so they stick everything onto a new tape. So they think everything's all scrambled. So if we take a tape, that'll be a random selection. We're going to try that and look at the metadata for the files and see if they actually do have a nice distribution and aren't idiosyncratic in some way, because we've got to do a better random sample. I mentioned that we'll look at the metadata for files and try to characterize them. We see this actually as a lovely side benefit of this work. One thing I've learned from other projects in computer security is that when the security person comes in and looks at a system for security purposes, they end up finding out all sorts of neat stuff that nobody knew before, because people develop the system and then they walk away. And as long as it's working, they're not going to look into it further. But the security person comes in and they need to say, as I said before, what the heck are all these files? So I'm going to be Mrs. Tell me all about CFS. So that's great. What's the distribution of files by size? How old are these files? What's the average age? What's the distribution? How many of these files have been created and never looked at for 20 years? Nobody knows, but it's a neat question. And then some of these are relevant for security purposes. You can give someone access to a file even if they're not the owner. So how many files actually have been accessed by other people? And who are these people who are accessing the other files? And is there anything there we should know about? Well, that's more for system usage. They've got all these parameters in the system. They don't know if anybody's ever used them. If you designed the system, you'd probably want to know the answer to that question. So now we've been working with this first storage system for a while. And you might want to know, have we actually found classified files at Los Alamos? And I could tell you, but then I would have to kill you, is what we always say at the lab. I can tell you that the consensus among the storage people and the security people is that our efforts have already greatly enhanced our lab's information security. I feel very proud of the work that we've done. Something I can tell you is that we do get a lot of false positives, but you can handle it. It's easy to eliminate the false positives, and it's actually operational, which isn't always the case. There are computer security systems out there that nobody ever effectively uses because it spits out so much junk that nobody ever wants to look at the output. This seems to be reasonable. So when I get back, one slide before. So this is just the first system, and actually the common file system that we're looking at is being phased out. All the tapes are going to be copied over to another system, which is HPSS or HPPS, and that's quite similar to CFS. But then we've got ADSM. Does anybody work with ADSM here? I've never worked with it either, but it's a way of backing up your local system. So like my Macintosh, I just back up onto some zip drives because I don't have a lot of stuff on it. But you have a big machine, you can use this central facility, I think it's an IBM product, and back everything up onto it. Well, it turns out that there's no super user access on the storage system. So the system administrators can't look at the files that have been stored. This is a security nightmare. This is a perfect example of how the technology moves on and people don't worry about the security aspects because Big Brother sometimes does need to be watching. And here Big Brother's shut out. Now, we have to, it might be okay because there are individual computers at the lab. Workstations are already reaching the point in their own storage capacity where DOE is interested because they've stipulated any storage facility bigger than X, you need to check. And individual workstations are getting up to X. So we might anyway have to do some sort of a sniffer that goes out and looks at files. In which case, not being able to get inside ADSM wouldn't be such a horrible thing because we can look at the systems themselves that are spawning these backups. But that was a real shocker. We found that we even talked to IBM, nothing. So when I get back my immediate priorities, constant fiddling. I'm always, of course, tinkering with the process as is and improving the output for maximal processability by our reviewers. Characterizing the archive is very important, especially I have to characterize this one tape full that we're taking as a sample to see whether taking a tape is going to work. Because if we can take a tape, it solves the sampling problem and it solves the transport issue to get the data from the open over onto the secure. That would be so wonderful. Then the real research thing, because I am a researcher by heart, I want to get back to the file types. Right now there's all sorts of data I'm putting aside because it isn't immediately readable. What the heck are those things? Which are the true binaries and which are the ones that might be in some other format that if I had a look at it I could figure out how to read it? Because I want to go back and get to those because it's too big a pile to be setting aside. It reduces the effectiveness of the whole process. And then it'll be great when we have this database in place to help the whole process go smoothly. And as the person who's actually been putting pieces of the process together, I need to work with our database person to make sure the design is right. So to conclude, I hope I've convinced you that we're dealing with a very real-world problem here. This is very much not abstract. It's important to our national security. And there's also interesting things in it. For the DOE study, we found that the statistical methods are promising, but really we can't say anything definitive until we've gone to a larger corpus. I hope we have the opportunity to do that. And for Los Alamos, we have found the expert systems to be a really nice start. And this is maturing into a true production system that ties in the computer research people and also the security people and the people who worry about storage. So that's all I have to say. Questions? Yes?
What type of shell are you using to develop your expert system?
Seashell. Lots of Perl. Yes?
Let's say I'm able to obtain a complete copy of all the unclassified data on a, let's say, a weekly basis. And then in the second week, I just compare all the files to what was there in the first week. And whatever is missing now is not classified. Is that just about correct? Is that a feasible way to...
What's missing is classified? Why?
You said you'll be looking at the unclassified data, what's already unclassified.
Uh-huh.
Try to find critical documents that might actually be classified.
Right.
Well, he will have a list of the documents which used to be classified and which are now suspect.
Oh, so you're saying if you wanted to be monitoring our activities to see what's been taken off because it turned out to be classified?
Wouldn't you be doing all the work for me in that case? Just
Oh.
figure out-
I don't think so. I don't think so because people are there's so much activity on the system already. Files come and go all the time. The daily transfer rates are absolutely enormous. So I think it would be lost in the soup.
So files are actually being taken out that are, I don't know.
Well, for different reasons, I think that's what.
Yes, yes. Well, people can delete their own files, but you're wondering if there's a trace that can be left when the security people come in and remove a file.
Well,
Yes?
I had the impression that you would just take out the classified files once you find them.
Yes, we do that, but it's an interesting question whether it would leave a different footprint. Okay, let's say a user deletes a file, case A. Case B is the security person comes in and deletes a file. Could a third party who's watching tell the difference? Am I with you?
But my understanding is that even if that happens, nevertheless, checking in this week and then next week, the gentleman will have a database of files, some of which were removed by your group because you suspect that they are classified. And so now, if he is a spy, he doesn't have to look at all the unclassified documents. He can just look at what is missing from one week to another. In that sense.
Oh, what did you say your name was?
I have it on the list, but Pascal, do you want to relate to that or a different
I've got a
question?
comment on that. I mean, if you have trouble getting a flat list of all the files, how would you do it? I mean, you could never do it. If they can do it, it ties up the
That's
system to
true.
hold it.
That's
How
true.
could you do it?
All you can get is the file that has the list of roots. Yes, it's security through obscurity. Yes?
Except you might be able to take a random sampling of the files and hope that his random sampling overlapped with your random sampling at some point.
It's too big. It's too big, and as I've shown, the random sampling processes on this system are fraught with difficulties. And I believe for HPSS, that's the one we're migrating to, we expect that we'll be taking a similar approach. Because it's organized directory-wise at the highest level, so you don't have a flat listing. So maybe that's a kind of protection. Yeah?
If I remember right from my DOE days, there's a problem called aggregation. That is that separate pieces of information that are not classified together
Right.
comprise classified information. And of course, I'm sure you're very familiar with Public Law 100-235, which requires identification of and special protections on potentially aggregatable information. Are you doing anything about this, or is it just another problem that needs to be solved in the future?
I think it would have to be for the future. It's related to the email problem. It's one thing to monitor individual email messages, but there's a whole science in constructing dialogues and threads out of the email, and from there you can see aggregation. But that's, you know, we'll see if they give us enough money to do the fun stuff. I sure hope they do.
But just to be on the safe side, you could ask the graduate committee to put them for you. We are used to doing this.
Well, the method that the gentleman suggested sounded interesting for a moment, but I would continue to rely on the waste baskets. that always works. Will always work in the future. Any more?
We actually have a double burden. If we find something, because we not only delete it from the system, but we have to keep like a copy of the whole tape for the FBI to look at. It's big.
I know.
They're very interested in possible persecutions.
I noticed one interesting thing, that you use the term automatic declassification ambiguous. That is, on the one hand, you were talking about automatically deciding, assisting the human reviewer what is classified, what is unclassified. On the other hand, you mentioned that on my 56th birthday, on the 17th of April 2000, something will become automatically declassified in a different sense. Not automatically, it will just be declared declassified.
Yes.
That deadline is dead, I'm sure.
It must be.
Yeah, because
I sure hope it is. Yeah, because
don't confuse those two automatic.
Yeah, because I've worked on the DOE declassification project, and I really, you know, they're continuing to go on with the work. It doesn't look like, you know, if it really happened, it would be like, you know, Bambi meets Godzilla, you know. And I haven't seen that green leathery skin. Yeah.
What about people that take their work home and have taken it onto their computer, and then they're out surfing on the web? How are you going to
Okay. All right. Well, this business about checking our archives is Trilab InfoSec action item number 5. I believe number 3 was to make it impossible to make electronic copies of classified data. And this was done by physical removal of things like floppy drives. I mean, sysadmins were going around with screwdrivers and taking them out. And there's also taping over of ports. And there's talk of, you know, developing special media. I don't think that could happen. There's too many workstations. You can't reconfigure everything. But everything was done. I think they, just judging from my little setup, they certainly did a good job of doing that. So I think that, you know, when I had to, when I got my DOE data, and so I had these precious documents finally, and the restart was over, so I could actually work. I had this floppy, and I wanted to get the data into the secure system. I had to go through my sysadmin, and we had a 2-man procedure to go into the one machine that had the floppy left, and it was a nightmare because she hadn't upgraded the operating system, so it couldn't read the floppy. Just this whole thing, they've made it very, very difficult. They've also, it used to be you could easily do an electronic transfer from the secure to the open, and now there's a 2-man rule and all sorts of bells and whistles on that. So they've made it, so the idea is we're not going to go home and check people's systems, but we're making it very difficult for them to take their work home.
What about a zip drive that runs off your parallel port?
I think those ports of either, I'm not a hardware person, I don't know if you can remove them or if you can tape over them, but whatever it is, they addressed the physical issues before they were allowed to restart the computing. Yeah?
How about optical technology like the timing synchronization watches?
What about what?
Optical technology like the timing synchronization watches. The watches that can take data off the screen simply from frequency.
Wow. I don't know anything about that.
So, I was going to ask about the taping over of ports. Just remove the tape.
It's special tamper indicating tape, and it's supposed to leave, if you try to take it off, it's supposed to leave an indelible mark on your computer. And this is official government issue stuff with like an ID number on it. I haven't actually tried it.
And is it the same in the labs? A former PhD of mine works for the National Security Agency, and they cannot bring in or take out any zip drives, floppies, nothing. Is it the same in the lab?
No, because we work in a mixed environment. So I have my secure machine and my unsecure machine with the requisite air distance between them. And I have a floppy, I have a zip drive on my open. Right. But there's nothing in place to keep you from walking in on one. I mean, we have regulations, and we have new regulations about things like cell phones. You have to take the batteries out of your cell phones when you come into the building.
I discovered, for instance, that I couldn't take my PowerBook into the NSA for my presentation and use the projector there because no such thing would be taken. I think I could take it in, but I wouldn't get it there.
Well, there are special protection areas at the lab, like special vaults and skiffs, and they may have more stringent requirements there. But in fact, in the area where I work, most work is unclassified. So, my office, I've got a special key and everything, a little, additional protection there because I have my secure port.
Any more questions, folks? As a taxpayer, I want to know what you all guys did for the 30 days that you couldn't work.
What was I doing then? Actually, it was opportune for me because I used that opportunity. I used that time to work on the physical review data. So I was bringing up my algorithm at that point.
I think it's a very good answer.
Yeah.